The station was going to die in 11 minutes, and Mara Voss was still trying to get the last channel to hold steady. Her hands moved across the console without shaking, which surprised her a little. Outside the viewport, pieces of the human fleet were burning as they fell toward the atmosphere, streaks of orange against the black. She didn't look at them anymore. She had looked at them for the first hour of the attack, and that was enough. "Voss, report," said a voice in her ear. It was Commander Ellery, and he sounded like a man reading his own eulogy. "Still here," Mara said. "Relay's still up, barely." "Good, because it's the only thing left that is." She didn't ask him to explain that. She already understood. 3 hours ago there had been a fleet defending Earth. Now there was static, wreckage, and one small relay station that the enemy hadn't bothered to destroy yet, probably because they didn't think it mattered. Mara thought of her brother, the way she always did when things got very quiet inside her chest. Toby had been 12 when she was 16, and she used to sit with him on the back step, taking apart an old radio just to show him how the signal traveled, how a voice could leave one place and arrive somewhere else, whole, if you built the path right. "You're not just pushing button, you're building a bridge," she'd told him. "The voice needs somewhere to land." He used to laugh at that. He said it sounded too poetic for someone who fixed radios for a living. He wasn't laughing anymore. He hadn't been anywhere anymore for 1 year and 4 months, since the evacuation convoy he was on didn't make it out in time. Mara had learned to carry that the way you carry a stone in your coat pocket. Always there, never getting lighter, but easier to live with once you stop pretending it isn't. "Voss." Ellery's voice cut through the memory. "Command wants one last transmission. Not a distress call. Those didn't work. Something else." "Something else? Like what?" "They're leaving that up to you. You're the last comms officer we've got, and you've got maybe 8 minutes to decide what the last thing humanity ever says is going to be." Mara sat with that for a second, then 2. She had spent the last 3 hours listening to Kordath's ships methodically dismantle everything humanity had built to defend itself. And she understood, really understood, in the marrow of her, that begging wasn't going to do anything. The Kordath Empire didn't listen to pleas. They hadn't listened to pleas from any of the other species they'd already conquered. That was common knowledge whispered through every human colony for the last 2 years of war. Whatever you send them, they erase. So maybe that was the answer. Send something they couldn't erase without reading it first. She pulled up an old file, one she wasn't supposed to have clearance for but had anyway because her division had helped decode it 18 months ago, and nobody had bothered updating her access before the war ate every bureaucracy alive. It was strange data, a signal fragment, ancient, buried in the backup archive of an old deep space listening post. Earth scientists had never been able to identify its origin. It didn't match any known species. It had structure, though. Mathematical structure. A pattern that looked unmistakably like a call for help. Nobody had known what to do with it. It had just sat there, an unsolved little mystery, filed away and forgotten. Mara stared at it now and felt something settle into place, quiet and certain. "Voss," Ellery said. 2 minutes. "I've got it," she said. She didn't send a plea. She didn't send coordinates or a threat or a demand for mercy. She attached the old signal fragment to a short, plain message, a handful of sentences, human words, nothing more, and set it burning through the relay on the widest frequency she could manage, aimed at anything and everything that might be listening. The station shuddered. Somewhere below her, metal screamed. "Transmission away," she said, and for one strange, brief second, she felt something like peace. Then the boarding alarm started, and peace ended. They didn't kill her. That surprised her almost as much as her own steadiness had. Kordath enforcers came through the station in armored shapes, methodical and quiet, and when they found her still sitting at the console, one of them simply lifted her out of the chair like she weighed nothing at all. "Why am I alive?" she asked, mostly to herself. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. She would learn the answer soon enough, though it would take her a long time to understand what it meant. Aboard the Kordath cruiser that carried her away from the wreckage of the relay station, a small, quiet functionary named Isk was doing what he did every single day of his unremarkable career, cataloging transmissions before deleting them. It was not glamorous work. Isk had never wanted glamorous work. He wanted a desk, a routine, and enough seniority eventually to stop being yelled at by people 3 ranks above him. He was good at his job precisely because he didn't ask questions about it. Humans sent messages. Imperial law required every one of them to be logged, verified as non-threatening, and destroyed. Isk had deleted 11,406 human transmissions in the last standard year. He did not remember the contents of a single one. This one was different, and he knew it within the first 4 seconds of the automated summary loading onto his screen. The system flagged an anomaly, an attached data fragment that didn't match any known human transmission format. It matched something else instead, something buried so deep in the Empire's own restricted archive that Isk didn't even have clearance to know what it was, only that the system recognized it, cross-referenced it, and quietly, almost apologetically, returned a result. Match found. Source classification restricted. His hand hovered over the delete function. He had done this 11,406 times without hesitating. He hesitated now. It wasn't bravery. Isk would have told anyone who asked that he was not a brave person, not even a little. It was simpler than that. A small, insistent question that formed in the back of his mind and refused to leave. Why would a human transmission be flagged against a restricted Imperial archive at all? Humans had no access to Imperial records. There was no way for that fragment to exist in both places unless it had come from somewhere older than either of them. He should have deleted it. The law was clear. The consequences for failing to delete a flagged transmission within the required window were not small. Instead, his fingers moved on their own, copying the file to a private data core before his supervisor's shift began, before the automated log could finalize, before he had time to talk himself out of it. He told himself he would delete it in an hour, once he understood what it was. He did not delete it in an hour. 3 hours later, Overseer Thren appeared in the doorway of the archive room, and the first thing she said was, "The deletion log shows a 2-minute delay on file 7312. Explain it." Isk felt his hearts when both of them attempt to climb out through his throat. "Technical fault," he said, which was a lie so small and so obvious that he was ashamed of it before he'd even finished saying it. Thren studied him for a long moment. She was not a cruel officer, not particularly, but she was a careful one. And careful officers noticed things that careless ones missed. "See that it doesn't happen again," she said finally, and left. Isk sat very still after she was gone, listening to his own pulse, and looked at the small data core sitting in his palm, a device no larger than a coin, holding inside it a message that 11,000 humans had died trying to send, and a fragment of something the Empire had apparently gone to great lengths to bury and forget. He should still delete it. He didn't. Down in the detention block 3 decks below, Mara Voss sat on a cold metal bench, hands bound, watching the door and waiting to find out what came next. She didn't know yet that, somewhere above her, a frightened little clerk was holding the fate of both their species in the palm of one shaking hand. She only knew that she was still alive when she shouldn't have been, and that the Kordath rarely did anything without a reason. She was still turning that thought over when the door slid open, and a different kind of Kordath stepped through, smaller, unarmored, carrying a data pad instead of a weapon, looking at her the way you look at something you've been told is dangerous, but can't quite believe it. "You," Isk said, his voice unsteady. "You're the one who sent it." Mara didn't answer right away. She simply watched him, reading the fear on his face like it was written in a language she somehow already understood. "Sent what?" she said. Isk's hand tightened around the data core in his pocket. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I think it's the reason you're still breathing, and I think whatever it is, I wasn't supposed to see it." Behind him, down the corridor, an alarm began to sound. The alarm turned out to be nothing to do with Isk at all, a routine hull integrity check on a lower deck. But by the time he learned that, he had already spent 30 seconds standing frozen in the detention block doorway, certain his career and possibly his life was over. Mara watched him carefully as the sound faded. "That wasn't for you," she said. "I know that. Now." Isk's voice was still tight. He glanced over his shoulder like the corridor itself might report him. "I need to put this back before anyone notices it's gone." "Then why haven't you?" It was a fair question, and Isk didn't have a good answer, which was somehow worse than not having one at all. He looked down at the little data core in his hand, like it had appeared there on its own. "Because if I put it back," he said slowly, "I have to delete it. And I don't understand what it is yet, and I don't like doing things I don't understand." "That makes two of us," Mara said. "Except I do understand it. I sent it." Isk's grip tightened. "Then tell me what it is." Mara studied him for a long moment. She had spent 3 hours expecting to be executed, and instead she was sitting across from a nervous, unarmored clerk who seemed more afraid of his own curiosity than of her. It didn't make sense yet, but she had learned, over 2 years of war, that the things which didn't make sense yet were usually the things worth paying attention to. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked instead of answering. "You people erase everything we send without reading it. That's the whole policy, isn't it? Don't read it, don't understand it, just make it disappear." Something flickered across Isk's face, not guilt exactly, but close to it. "That's the law," he said. "It's always been the law. Every human transmission, destroyed unread, no exceptions." "That's not an answer, that's a rule." I asked why. Isk opened his mouth, then closed it again. He genuinely didn't know. It had never occurred to him to ask. It was simply how things had always been done, the way water simply flowed downhill, not because anyone had ever explained the reason to him, but because questioning it had never seemed necessary or safe. "I don't know," he admitted finally, and the admission seemed to cost him something. "I've deleted over 11,000 of your people's messages. I never asked why once, not until this one." "What's different about this one?" Before he could answer, footsteps sounded down the corridor, and Isk startled so badly he nearly dropped the data core. He shoved it deep into his coat and straightened, arranging his face into something approximating professional calm, just as another guard passed the doorway without so much as glancing in. When the sound faded, Isk let out a breath. "I have to go," he said, "before Thren checks the archive room again." Thren, my overseer, she already knows there was a delay in the deletion log. If she finds out I copied the file instead of destroying it. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Mara leaned forward as far as her bound hands allowed. "Then don't get caught, but come back. You clearly have questions, I have answers. That seems like something worth trading." Isk hesitated at the door, and for the first time, something other than fear crossed his face, something that looked almost like curiosity fighting its way free of a lifetime of careful obedience. "Why would you help me?" he asked. "I work for the people who destroyed your home." "You didn't destroy my home," Mara said quietly. "And right now, you're the only person on this ship who's asked me a single question instead of just deciding what to do with me. That matters more than you'd think." He left without answering, and Mara sat back against the cold wall, turning the exchange over in her mind. She didn't know yet what she'd started. She only knew that for the first time since the relay station fell, she felt something other than grief sitting in her chest. It felt, cautiously, like purpose. That night, if a ship without windows could be said to have a night, Isk sat alone in his small quarters and did the thing he had told himself he wouldn't do. He opened the file. The message itself was short, human words plainly spoken, recorded in a woman's steady voice that he now knew belonged to the prisoner 3 decks below him. He didn't understand most of the human language references, but the translation matrix filled in enough for him to follow the shape of it. A statement, not a plea. A record, not a surrender. Attached to it, Embedded like a second voice beneath the first, was the anomaly, the fragment that had matched against the Empire's own restricted archive. Isk had never had clearance to view restricted archive material, but the system had shown him just enough in its match summary to make his stomach turn cold, a designation code, ancient by any measure, referencing an event catalogued centuries before Isk's own grandparents were born. An event with no public record. An event that, as far as any ordinary Kordath citizen knew, had simply never happened. He didn't know what the event was. He only knew, with the instinctive certainty of someone who had spent his whole career learning to recognize when something was being deliberately hidden, that whatever it was, it terrified someone very high up in his own government enough that they had spent centuries making sure nobody ever found it again. And now a human message, sent by a woman on a dying station using a signal fragment she had no business having, had reached across all that careful erasure and found it anyway. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, Thren found irregular data traffic on his terminal, a small automated flag that any competent overseer would have caught eventually, and Thren was nothing if not competent. "Explain this," she said, sliding the log across to him. Isk looked at the timestamp and felt his heart sink. It was from his late-night review of the file. He had been careless. Fear made people careless. He understood that now in a way he never had before. "I was reviewing a flagged transmission," he said, choosing the truth because he couldn't think fast enough to build a convincing lie. "There was an anomaly. I wanted to understand it before logging the deletion." Thren's expression didn't change, which was somehow worse than if it had. "Understanding is not your function, archivist. Compliance is your function. What was the anomaly?" "A cross-match," Isk said carefully, "against a restricted archive designation. I don't have clearance to view the source material." Something shifted behind Thren's eyes, small but unmistakable. She was quiet for a long moment. "Which designation?" she said, and her voice had gone very flat. Isk told her. Whatever color Kordath's skin turned when the blood left it, Thren's did exactly that. "You will bring me the file," she said. "Now, and you will speak of this to no one." He obeyed, because obedience was the only thing he knew how to do under pressure, and because the look on Thren's face frightened him more than anything he'd felt since the war began. But as he handed over the data core, he understood, with the same instinctive certainty from the night before, that he had just placed himself and possibly the human prisoner 3 decks below, directly in the path of something the Empire would go to terrible lengths to keep buried. 2 hours later, he was summoned back to Thren's office and found the human woman already there, hands still bound, standing under guard. "You will explain," Thren said, "why a human transmission exists that no human should have been able to send. And you," she turned to Isk, "will explain why, instead of deleting it as ordered, you listened to it twice." Isk swallowed hard. "Play it," Thren said. "Both of you will hear what the other has already heard. Let's see how well you understand what you've done." Mara's eyes met Isk's across the room, and for the first time since her capture, Mara saw real fear on a Kordath face. Not fear of her, but fear of what was about to be said out loud. Thren's hand hovered over the console. "Now," she said, "let's find out what's worth centuries of silence." The message played into a room gone completely silent. Mara's own recorded voice filled the space first, calm and plain, the same handful of sentences she'd sent from the dying relay station. Thren barely reacted to that part. It was the second layer, the old signal fragment riding underneath it, translated now through the ship's systems into something closer to Kordath's speech patterns, that made her go rigid in her chair. Isk didn't understand the words, but he understood the reference number that flashed across the display beside it, because he'd seen it twice already, and it had haunted him both times. A designation tied to an event centuries in the past, filed away under a classification so old that even the classification itself felt like an apology. Nobody had ever had the courage to finish writing. "Turn it off," Thren said before the recording had even finished. Isk cut the audio. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound had. "What is it?" Mara asked, not defiant, Not frightened either, not really. Just steady, the way she'd been steady on the relay station with the whole sky burning outside her window. You clearly know. I don't. I'd like to. Thren's eyes moved to her slowly, and for a moment Mara thought she wouldn't answer at all. Then something in the overseer's posture shifted. Not softening exactly, but settling, like a person deciding that some truths were too heavy to keep holding alone. It is a first contact event, Thren said quietly. One that predates our current empire by centuries. It is not taught. It is not recorded except in the deepest restricted archives, and even there it is incomplete by design. She paused. Most Kordath alive today do not know it happened at all. Then how does a human message know about it? Isk asked before he could stop himself. That, Thren said, is the question that is going to get all three of us killed. She said it plainly, without drama, which somehow made it more frightening than if she'd shouted it. I need to contact Imperial Command, she continued. This cannot stay contained to one cruiser. Whatever this signal is, however it reached her. She gestured toward Mara. It means information the Empire buried on purpose has resurfaced through a species we're actively trying to erase. That is not a coincidence Command will tolerate. Erase, Mara repeated softly. So that's the word for it, not conquer. Erase. Thren didn't answer that, which was its own kind of answer. She rose, moved to the door, then paused and looked back at Isk. You will remain here, both of you, under guard. I need to think about how much of this I report and how. You're going to lie to your own command? Isk asked, startled. I am going to survive this conversation, Thren said. There is a difference, and I intend to find it before I open my mouth. She left. The door sealed behind her. For a long moment, neither Mara nor Isk spoke. Then Mara shifted against her restraints and said quietly, She's afraid. Really afraid. I've seen a lot of frightened people in the last 2 years. That wasn't fear of getting in trouble. That was fear of something much bigger. She should be afraid, Isk said. If Command finds out this reached a human transmission, and that I saw it, being frightened will be the mildest reaction available to any of us. Mara studied him. You keep saying us. A few hours ago you worked for the people trying to kill everyone I know. I know what I keep saying, Isk said, and he sounded almost surprised by it himself. Neither of them got the chance to examine that any further, because the ship shuddered. Not the shudder of an alarm test this time, but something heavier, more deliberate, the kind of tremor that came from something very large, deciding to stop being gentle. An announcement crackled through the corridor speakers in rapid Kordath. Isk's face went pale as he listened. What is it? Mara asked. A cleanser vessel, Isk said. Just entered weapons range. A what? A ship whose only function is containment, Isk said, and his voice had gone thin. When information becomes a threat the Empire can't control through normal channels, a cleanser doesn't capture it. It removes it. Ship, crew, everyone who might have heard it. Gone, quietly, and the official record says, equipment failure. Mara felt something cold settle in her stomach. You're saying they'd kill their own crew, over an old message. I'm saying, Isk said, that this cruiser now has a crew who overheard fragments of exactly the kind of secret that justifies sending one. Down the corridor, they heard Thren's voice, sharp and urgent, arguing with someone over comms, pleading, though Isk had never heard her plead before, not once in 3 years of serving under her. Then the door burst open, and it wasn't a guard who came through it. It was Thren herself, and for the first time since Mara had met her, the overseer looked less like an officer of the Empire and more like a person who had just realized the ground beneath her feet had never been solid at all. Command has ordered the cruiser destroyed, Thren said, her voice clipped and fast, along with everyone aboard it. They are not willing to risk containment failure a second time. A second time, Isk repeated numbly. There is no time to explain that, Thren snapped. There is a shuttle bay 2 decks down. It is small, unarmed, and it is the only vessel on this ship that can outrun what's coming for us. Mara stared at her. You're helping us escape? I am choosing which failure I can live with, Thren said. And right now, letting the two of you disappear quietly is easier to explain than letting an Imperial secret detonate in front of my entire crew. She stepped forward and, with a speed that startled both of them, cut the binding on Mara's wrists herself. Take the data core. Take the human. Go now, while there's still a corridor to go through. What about you? Isk asked. Thren's expression didn't change. I have a cruiser full of people who don't yet know they're about to die for something they never heard. I intend to spend whatever time I have left trying to change that outcome if I can. Go. Isk hesitated only a second longer before grabbing Mara's arm and pulling her toward the corridor. Behind them, Thren was already turning back toward the bridge, shouting orders into her comm, her voice steady again in the way of someone who has decided, finally and completely, what kind of person she intends to be in her last few minutes of certainty. The shuttle bay was chaos. Crew running in every direction, alarms shrieking overhead, the deep bone-rattling hum of weapons charging somewhere far above them. Isk hauled Mara into the nearest unmarked shuttle, hands shaking as he powered the systems on. Do you know how to fly this? Mara asked. No, Isk admitted. Do you? I fixed radios for a living before the war, Mara said, already sliding into the second seat and scanning the unfamiliar controls with the quick, desperate focus of someone who had learned, over 2 years of losing everything, how to figure things out fast or not at all. But I've flown worse than this on less time than we've got. Strap in. The shuttle lurched free of the bay just as the massive shape of the cleanser vessel swung into full view through the forward viewport. Sleek, dark, and utterly silent in a way that felt far more threatening than any weapon fire could have. For one impossible second, Mara thought it was going to fire on them. It didn't. It fired on the cruiser instead. The ship they'd just escaped, the ship where Thren still stood on the bridge trying to save a crew who would never know what they'd almost overheard. The cruiser lit up from the inside, a bloom of white fire swallowing the hull in a single silent flash, and then it was simply gone, scattering into a slow spreading field of debris and light. Mara didn't speak. Beside her, Isk made a small, broken sound that wasn't quite a word. Behind them, the cleanser vessel began, unhurried and certain to turn. The cleanser vessel didn't chase them. Mara kept waiting for it to, kept her hands tight on the unfamiliar controls, kept glancing at the sensor display expecting pursuit, but the massive dark shape simply hung where it was, motionless against the wreckage field that used to be a cruiser full of people, and eventually shrank to a point of light, and then to nothing at all as the shuttle put distance between them. It's not following, she said, disbelieving. It doesn't need to, Isk said quietly. He was staring at the debris field on the rear display, and his voice had the flat, hollow sound of someone still trying to process what he'd just watched happen. It already did what it came to do. As far as anyone will ever know, that cruiser suffered a catastrophic containment failure. No survivors. No further investigation required. Thren is dead, Isk said, before she could finish the sentence. Along with everyone else on that ship, because they might have overheard something they didn't even understand. Mara didn't say anything for a while after that. She thought about the relay station, about Ellery's voice in her ear counting down the minutes, about all the people she'd watched burn out of the sky without ever getting the chance to understand why. Loss had a shape to it after enough repetition. She recognized this one. I'm sorry, she said finally. Isk looked at her, surprised. You didn't do this. No, but I understand what it costs. Watching people disappear for reasons too big to make sense of. She hesitated, then added quieter. My brother died in an evacuation that didn't make it out in time. I've had over a year to learn what that kind of grief does to a person. It doesn't ask permission to show up, it just does. Something in Isk's posture eased slightly, like the admission had given him permission to feel what he was feeling, instead of burying it under procedure. I've never lost anyone, he admitted. Not like that. I've filed reports about losses. I've never had to carry one. You're carrying one now. He didn't answer, but he didn't disagree either. They drifted in silence for a while, the shuttle's systems humming quietly around them, before Mara finally asked the question that had been sitting in her chest since the recording played in Thren's office. Tell me what you know about your own history, the real version, not what gets taught. Isk was quiet for a long moment, like he was deciding how much of himself he was willing to hand over. Officially, he said slowly, the Kordath Empire achieved spaceflight through our own effort, our own ingenuity, entirely alone. It's the foundation of everything we're taught as children. That no one helped us, that no one guided us, that we built everything we have with nothing but our own hands and our own minds. It's a point of tremendous pride. It's in our songs, our monuments, everything. But the file, Isk said, the designation. It references an event centuries before any of that, before we should have had the technology to even detect another species, let alone catalog and classify contact with one. He shook his head slowly. I don't understand how both things can be true, unless one of them isn't. Mara felt the shape of it before she had the words for it, the way you feel a storm coming before you see the clouds. She reached for the data core, still tucked safely in Isk's coat, and turned it over in her hands. On Earth, she said slowly, we found an old signal, buried in an archive nobody had opened in decades. It didn't match anything we knew. No known species, no known origin point. It had structure, though, mathematical structure, the kind that doesn't happen by accident. It read like a distress call. Old, very old, and whoever sent it never got an answer. Isk went very still. You think it's connected to my designation, he said. I think, Mara said carefully, that maybe your empire didn't achieve spaceflight entirely alone. I think maybe, a very long time ago, something out there called for help and someone heard it and did nothing. And maybe that's not a story anyone wants carved into a monument. The shuttle's cabin felt smaller after she said it, like the words themselves had used up some of the air. If that's true, Isk said slowly, then the entire foundation of everything we're taught, the idea that we did this alone, that we needed no one, that our success is proof of our own singular greatness, all of it would be built on a lie the Empire has spent centuries protecting instead of correcting. That's usually why people protect lies, Mara said, not because the truth is dangerous, because admitting it makes you look smaller than you always claim to be. Isk didn't respond to that right away. He was quiet for long enough that Mara thought the conversation had ended, until he spoke again, and his voice had changed. Steadier, but sadder too, like something inside him had finished breaking and settled into its new shape. 11,406, he said. What? That's how many human transmissions I deleted before yours. Every one of them unread because the law said humans were dangerous and their words weren't worth the risk of listening. I never questioned it. Not once. It never occurred to me that the reason might not be about you at all. He looked at her. It might be about what we did once to someone else and never wanted to be reminded of again. Before Mara could respond, the shuttle's console chimed, a soft, insistent tone that made Isk's head snap toward the display. That's an open broadcast, he said, surprised. Not encrypted, not imperial priority, just open. He pulled it up, and a garbled, fractured transmission filled the cabin. Voices layered over each other in dozens of languages Mara didn't recognize, urgent and overlapping. Isk listened for a moment, his expression shifting from confusion to something like disbelief. What is it? Mara asked. Other species, Isk said slowly. One's under imperial rule or allied to it. They're reacting. Someone leaked fragments of what happened on the cruiser, the designation, the rumor of what it means. It's spreading faster than command can contain it. Are they angry? Some of them, Isk said. Some are afraid. Some don't believe it at all and are calling it a fabrication designed to destabilize the Empire. He shook his head. It doesn't matter which. What matters is that the truth is already loose, And my people can't put it back in the box anymore, no matter how many cruisers they're willing to sacrifice. Mara felt something like hope flicker in her chest for the first time since the relay station fell. Small, fragile, but real. Then the data core in her hands gave a soft, sputtering whine, and the little light on its side flickered from green to a warning amber. "That's not good," Isk said, leaning over to look at it. "It's failing," Mara said, feeling her stomach drop. "The recording, the fragment, all of it. It must have been damaged when the cruiser was hit." "Can you fix it?" "I fixed radios," Mara said, already prying open the casing with a tool from the shuttle's small kit, not centuries-old classified data cores built by an alien empire. "I'll try. I can't promise anything." She worked in silence for several minutes, Isk watching over her shoulder, both of them painfully aware that the only proof either species had of what had really happened was dying slowly in her hands. Before she could finish, the console chimed again, a different tone this time, sharper, more deliberate. A hail. Isk answered it out of instinct before he thought better of it, and a Kordath face filled the display. Older than Thren had been, weathered, with eyes that studied Mara and Isk both with an intensity that made the hair on Mara's arms rise. "I know what you're carrying," the stranger said, in careful, measured Kordath. "And I know what it cost to get it this far. My name is Varen Doss. I am the captain of the vessel currently matching your course, and I have spent most of my life searching for exactly what you're holding." Iski's hand hovered near the console controls, ready to cut the transmission. "How do we know you're not the one sent to finish what the cleanser started?" Varen's expression didn't waver. "You don't," he said. "But I'd remind you that if I wanted you dead, you already would be. I found you before Command did. That should tell you something about who you're really speaking to." He paused, and something flickered behind his eyes. Old grief, carefully worn down into something quieter, but no less heavy. "My family," he said slowly, "has carried a secret for longer than either of you have been alive. I believe it's the same one you're holding in your hands right now, and I have been waiting a very long time for someone to finally prove it's true." Varen Doss's ship was old, not decayed, but the kind of old that came from being cared for by the same hands for a very long time. Mara noticed it the moment she stepped aboard. The worn edges of the corridor railings, the careful, deliberate maintenance of systems that could have been replaced decades ago, but hadn't been, like the ship itself was a keepsake rather than a tool. Varen met them personally at the airlock, and up close he looked older than his voice had suggested, his eyes carrying the particular weariness of someone who has spent a long time waiting for a conversation he wasn't sure would ever happen. "You'll forgive me if I don't waste time on pleasantries," he said, leading them deeper into the ship. "We don't have much of it. Command knows something leaked. They don't yet know exactly what or where, but that won't last." "You said your family carried this secret," Isk said. "Carried it how? For how long?" Varen led them into a small private chamber lined with old data storage, physical archives, the kind Isk had only ever seen in historical records, the sort of thing nobody used anymore because it was slow and fragile and impossible to encrypt properly. "Because writing it down anywhere official would have gotten every one of us erased," Varen said simply. "This is safer, slower, but safer. No one thinks to look for secrets in outdated storage anymore." He gestured for them to sit. "My many times grandfather was an officer centuries ago, aboard one of the earliest deep space listening posts the Empire ever built. He was the one who first received the signal." Mara felt her pulse quicken. "He reported it," Varen continued, "faithfully, exactly as procedure required. A distress call, mathematically structured, clearly artificial, clearly desperate. High Command reviewed it and made a decision." He paused and his voice grew heavier. "They decided the risk of contact outweighed the cost of silence. The species calling for help was too far, too unknown, too potentially dangerous to justify a response. So they didn't answer. They simply logged it, classified it, and ordered every record of the event sealed." "And your grandfather?" Isk asked. Lived the rest of his life believing he'd failed someone, Varen said. He never stopped listening for a second signal that never came. Eventually, he understood what that silence meant. Whoever sent that call needed help that never arrived, and by the time we might have looked for them again, there was nothing left to find. The room was silent, except for the low hum of old equipment. He recorded fragments of what he knew before he died, Varen continued. Passed down carefully, generation to generation, never spoken aloud, never trusted to any system the Empire could access. My family has been quietly gathering pieces of the truth ever since, hoping that someday, somehow, enough proof would surface that we could finally force the Empire to admit what it did. He looked at the data core still cradled in Mara's hands. I never expected that proof to arrive wrapped in a human voice. Mara set the data core down carefully on the table between them, its warning light still blinking amber. I need to finish repairing this, she said, but there's something else you should know before I do. She took a slow breath. The signal fragment we found on Earth wasn't just old. When our scientists studied its structure, they found something strange. Mathematical patterns that echoed principles buried deep in our own earliest radio theory. Not identical, but related. Like two dialects of the same original language. Varen's expression sharpened. What are you saying? I'm saying, Mara said slowly, feeling the weight of the words even as she spoke them, that the species who sent that original distress call might not be a stranger to humanity at all. It might be an ancestor. Something in humanity's own past might trace back to whatever civilization your grandfather heard calling for help, and never answered. The room went very still. That would mean, Isk said quietly, working it through, that the Empire didn't just fail one unrelated species centuries ago. It failed the ancestors of the very people it's been trying to erase all over again, right now, in this war. I can't prove that with certainty, Mara admitted. The connection is there in the data, but it's fragile, incomplete. It might never be more than a strong theory, but it's enough. Enough that if the Empire ever learns humans might be descended from the species they let die, they'll have every reason to make absolutely certain no human survives to say so. Varen sat back slowly, and for a long moment he looked less like a captain and more like a very old man, finally setting down a weight he'd carried alone for far too long. My grandfather spent his whole life grieving a mistake he had no power to fix, he said. I have spent most of mine trying to finish what he started. I am not willing to let that end in silence again. He looked between them, resolve settling into his features like something long overdue. I intend to broadcast what we know. The recording, the archive designation, everything. Across every channel this ship can reach. Not to attack the Empire. To force it finally. To answer for what it never had the courage to answer for the first time. They'll kill you for it, Isk said. They may kill me for it regardless, Varen said simply. At least this way, it will have meant something. Word of the coming broadcast reached Imperial Command faster than any of them expected. Within the hour, Varen's sensors picked up an Imperial enforcer vessel moving to intercept. Fast, heavily armed, unmistakably serious about its purpose. They're not sending a cleanser this time, Isk said, reading the ship's markings with a chill creeping into his voice. They're sending someone who already knows exactly what we're carrying. The hail came through a moment later, and the face that appeared on the display made Mara's breath catch. Thren, she whispered. The overseer looked different, harder, colder, the careful composure Mara remembered replaced by something flintier. You're surprised, Thren said, and there was no warmth in it. I imagine you assumed I died with my ship. How? Isk started. I transferred to an escape pod moments before the cleanser fired, Thren said flatly. I have spent the hours since being reminded, in great detail, of exactly how disposable my crew was considered the moment they became inconvenient. Command has given me one final chance to redeem that failure. I intend to take it. By killing us, Mara said. By stopping a broadcast that will tear this empire apart, Thren said. You don't understand what you're about to unleash. If what you're carrying is true, it doesn't just embarrass Command. It undermines the entire foundation this empire was built on. The belief that we achieved everything alone, that we owe nothing to anyone, that we are entirely the architects of our own greatness. Take that away, and you don't get honesty. You get chaos, fractured loyalty, civil war, possibly, across a dozen systems that have spent centuries believing a lie they built their whole identity around. So your solution is more silence, Isk said. More erasure. Forever. My solution, Thren said, is survival. Mine. My people's. I watched an entire crew die because of a secret they never even understood. I am done paying that price for the comfort of the truth. The transmission cut. Moments later, Varen's ship shuddered under the first strike. She's going to fire on us until we're gone, Varen said grimly, already moving toward the small relay array bolted into the rear of his ship. An old, isolated transmitter, independent of the main systems, built specifically for moments exactly like this one. If the main broadcast systems go down before we transmit, this is our only remaining option. It's slow, low power, but if it survives long enough to complete the signal, it will still reach far enough to matter. Mara looked at the data core in her hands, its warning light steady now, repaired finally in the hours since they'd boarded. It's ready, she said, but someone has to carry it to the array and trigger it manually if the main systems fail. I'll go, Isk said immediately. Mara looked at him, and something in his face told her this wasn't fear talking anymore. It was resolve, hard-won, and entirely his own. Not alone, she said, standing. I already lost someone I loved because I wasn't there when it mattered. I'm not doing that again. The ship shuddered again, harder this time, alarms rising around them as they moved toward the relay array at the rear of the vessel, the data core clutched tightly between them. They reached it just as the ship lurched violently, throwing them both against the bulkhead. Through the small viewport beside the array, a massive shape decloaked directly above them, weapons already glowing bright and ready. Thren's ship. And through the static of the open comm channel still crackling nearby, her voice came through one final time, cold and certain. You should have let me put it back, she said. Now there's nothing left to do but finish this. The relay array was small, older than the rest of the ship, and utterly exposed. A single console bolted near a viewport that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of Thren's vessel closing in above them. Time? Mara shouted over the alarms. 90 seconds until the array is fully charged, Isk said, hands flying across the controls with a speed she hadn't seen from him before. Fear still lived in him, she could tell, but it had stopped controlling him. It needs to build a full power cycle before it can transmit far enough to matter. We don't have 90 seconds. I'm aware, Isk said, and kept working anyway. The ship rocked again as Thren's vessel fired a warning shot across their bow, close enough to rattle the walls, far enough to make its intention clear. She wasn't trying to kill them yet. She was trying to make them stop. Thren's voice crackled through the open channel, closer now, colder. Last chance, she said. Hand over the data core and I will make sure Command believes it was destroyed in the earlier attack. No one else needs to die for this. You'll erase it, Mara said, just like everything else. I'll survive it, Thren said. So will you, if you're smart enough to let me. Mara looked at Isk. He didn't look back at her. His focus was entirely on the array, on the slow climb of the charge indicator, on the seconds ticking down toward something that might still not be enough. She believes she's protecting people, Mara said quietly, almost to herself. That's what makes her dangerous, not cruelty, conviction. Then maybe conviction is what we answer with, Isk said. He opened the channel wider before Mara could stop him, patching the relay array directly into it, and looked into the display where Thren's face waited, hard and expectant. You lost a crew, Isk said, his voice steadier than Mara had ever heard it. Because a secret got loose that none of them understood. You're right to be angry about that. You're right that it cost something that can't be repaid. He swallowed. But hiding this again won't bring them back. It will just mean the next person who finds it dies exactly the same way they did. Confused, afraid, caught in the middle of a truth nobody let them see coming. I used to believe silence was safety, too. I deleted 11,000 voices because I was told that not knowing was the same as being protected. It isn't. It never was. It's just slower harm, spread out over more people, for longer. Thren's jaw tightened, but she didn't fire. The Empire didn't fall because of one distress call centuries ago, Isk continued. It's not going to fall because of this one either. But it might finally have to become something honest, instead of something merely intact. Those aren't the same thing, and I think somewhere under all that conviction you already know it. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Thren's expression didn't soften, didn't crack, gave away nothing at all. Then, from somewhere behind her on the bridge, Varen's ship, battered, smoking along one flank, cut across her firing line, drawing her weapons fire in a desperate, deliberate maneuver that shook the whole vessel. Now! Varen's voice crackled over the comm, strained with effort. While she's distracted, trigger it now. The charge indicator on the array blinked to full just as Isk's console lit up with impact warnings, the ship groaning under the strain of Thren's return fire. Isk didn't hesitate. He slammed his hand down on the transmission control, and the small array hummed to sudden, furious life, pouring every ounce of power it had into a single outward burst. The recording, the archive designation, the fragile theory connecting an ancient dying call to a living, breathing species that had refused, against every possible reason, to disappear quietly. The signal went out wide, unencrypted, aimed at anything and everything that might be listening. The same way Mara had sent her first message from a dying relay station, weeks and a lifetime ago. For a moment, nothing happened. The ship shook again under fire. Isk staggered, catching himself against the console, a thin line of dark blood tracing down from somewhere above his eye where he'd struck the bulkhead. Then, across the display, confirmation lights began to blink on, one after another. Relay stations, listening posts, ships scattered across a dozen systems, each one catching the broadcast and, unable to stop it, passing it along to the next. It was loose. Fully, finally, irreversibly loose. On the bridge of her own vessel, Thren watched the confirmation cascade across her own systems, the same broadcast now playing, unbidden, over the open channels of her own crew's stations. She heard, for the first time alongside everyone under her command, the full weight of what her empire had buried. An old cry for help, ignored, a species left to vanish, and a new species, born perhaps from whatever scattered remnant of that old civilization survived, standing now in the wreckage of that silence and simply stubbornly, refusing to be erased in turn. Her hand hovered over the firing controls. Mara watched through the viewport, breath held, waiting for the shot that would end everything. It didn't come. Slowly, deliberately, Thren lowered her hand from the console. On the display, her expression had changed, not softened into forgiveness, not anything so simple as that, but settled into something heavier and more honest, the look of a person choosing finally to stop protecting a lie she no longer had the strength to carry. Command will want my head for this, she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone listening. Maybe, Isk said, still bracing himself against the console, blood drying above his eye. Or maybe they'll finally have to answer for something instead of just erasing whoever finds it. Thren didn't respond to that. She simply closed the channel, and her ship, after a long, tense moment, began to withdraw. It wasn't a victory, not the kind with parades or declarations. But it was, Mara thought, watching the massive shape retreat into the dark, something that mattered more than that. The first small crack in a wall that had stood, uninterrupted, for centuries. She found Isk sitting alone afterward in the relay chamber, a medical patch pressed clumsily against the cut above his eye, staring at the now dark array console like he still couldn't quite believe what it had done. You did that, Mara said, sitting down beside him. Not the message. You. You could have handed it over. You could have stayed exactly what you were, a clerk who followed the rules and never asked why. Instead, you chose this. I deleted 11,000 voices, Isk said quietly. I can't undo that. I can't give any of them back. No, Mara agreed. But you can make sure the 11,001st one didn't die for nothing. She reached over and carefully took his hand, not as a human comforting an alien, but simply as one exhausted, grieving person reaching for another. That's not nothing, Isk, that's not small. That's the only kind of repair any of us ever really get to make. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, something in his face eased all the way into something like peace. The weeks that followed were slower, quieter, and far less certain than any grand ending might have promised. The Kordath Empire did not collapse. It did not apologize, not officially, not all at once. But the broadcast could not be unheard. And slowly, painfully, cracks widened into conversations, and conversations widened into demands, and demands began, haltingly, imperfectly, to reshape the careful, brittle mythology the Empire had built its identity on for centuries. Varen survived his ship's final stand, badly wounded but alive, and spent the months afterward doing publicly what his family had once only dared to do in secret, telling the truth over and over to anyone who would listen, until enough people had heard it that silence stopped being an option. Humanity was not welcomed as conquerors, and it was not treated as a defeated species either. It was invited, cautiously and imperfectly, into something new, not because it had proven itself stronger than the Empire, but because a handful of ordinary people, a comms officer who refused to send a plea, a frightened clerk who refused to delete an inconvenient truth, had shown, in the smallest and most human way possible, what it looked like to answer a call for help instead of erasing it. Months later, Mara stood at the observation deck of a newly built listening post, one designed this time to never again let a distress call vanish unanswered into a sealed archive, and watched the stars turn slowly overhead. Isk found her there, as he often did now, carrying 2 cups of something warm that neither species had a proper name for yet. "Still listening for it?" he asked, settling beside her. "Always," Mara said. "Someone should." She thought of Toby, of the radio on the back step, of the bridge a voice needed to cross to land somewhere safe. She thought of 11,000 deleted messages, of a station burning above a dying Earth, of a single fragile signal that had refused, against every reasonable expectation, to disappear. The grief was still there, it always would be. But it had found, finally, somewhere useful to stand. "You built the bridge," Isk said quietly, echoing words she'd told him once, in pieces, over the long weeks it took to trust him with her brother's memory. The voice needed somewhere to land. You gave it one. Mara smiled, small and tired and real, and looked back out at the stars, no longer burning, no longer silent, simply waiting, the way they always had, for someone to finally answer.